This is Black Writers Read. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today for episode 7 of season 6 of Black Writers Read. My name is Nicole Young Martin, and I'm the founder, producer, and host of this series. It has been a packed week. This is the first time I've done 5 live broadcasts in 1 week. Thanks to everyone who joined me throughout this time. Tuesday, I chatted with Tiffany Tilley, where we talked about self-resilience and personal transformation. And this past Friday, National Black Poetry Day, I had on 3 amazing Black male poets. Shout out to Damon, Seneca, and Tariq for being on, talking about your work. And today I have on another amazing author. And I love that even though all of your work is different, all 5 of you, I'm glad that the universe brought it together because all of your work speaks on certain types of resiliency and other types of how do we move through and recover through trauma. So thank you all for being in this space in this particular way. If you want to catch any of these recorded live broadcasts, the past 4, please visit my YouTube channel by just typing in my name, Nicole Young Martin. Today, I continue the conversation on poetry and very excited to introduce this afternoon's guest. So it's 12:20 p.m. Eastern time. Y'all know I always start late, so I highly, highly thank you for waiting. I get into really deep conversation pre-show with my guest, and today's guest, just from the time we got to talk, we've been following each other on Instagram for a while now, but I shared with her how I was doing, and she saw me immediately. So it just means even more to be able to spend my Sunday afternoon, the day of respite, and the day of the beginning of the new week with her. So let's get started. Black Writers Read showcases, celebrates, and honors the words, work, and traditions of Black writers from across the country, across genres, across experiences, and across the African diaspora. Black Writers Read is a behind-the-scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. Since starting the series on Juneteenth of 2020, we've hosted over 90 authors representing over 15 genres from 6 countries and 26 states. And now we have... I keep forgetting what Puerto Rico is called for the US. So I'm glad that we have someone from Puerto Rico finally joining the slate. Our platform includes the live stream interviews, audio podcasts, book clubs, and curriculum integration assistance. Find us online at blackwritersread.com. Today, we welcome Dr. Dorsía Smith Silva. Dorsía Smith Silva is the author of In Inheritance of Drowning, published by CavanKerry Press and released in November of 2024. Which was a category finalist for, there is a list, I'm excited to announce this, the National Indie Excellence Award, Eric Hoffer Award, Whirling Prize, and the Vinci Eye Award, reviewed by Publishers Weekly and recommended by Ms. Magazine. She is a multi-nominated Pushcart Prize nominee, Best of the Net finalist, Best New Poets nominee, Canem Poetry Prize semifinalist, Obsidian Fellow, poetry editor at the Hopper, and give it up for a Black woman, full professor of English at the University of Puerto Rico, Río Piedras, Literary Hub, Poets.org, Poets and Writers, Poetry Daily, Split This Rock, and the Los Angeles Review have published her work and poems are forthcoming in the Cimarron Review and Beloit Poetry Journal. Oh my God, she's so accomplished, y'all. She has attended the Bread Loaf Environmental Writers Workshop, Bread Loaf Writers Workshop, Kenyon Review Writers Workshop, Tin House Winter Workshop, Looking Glass Rock Writers Conference, and Poets and Scholars Summer Writers Retreat at the Institute for the Study of Global Racial Justice. She is the recipient of scholarships and fellowships from Bread Loaf and the Martha's Vineyard Institute of Creative Writing. This I'm even more excited to announce because I got the magazine in the mail and I was like, oh my God, it was so exciting to see her name present there. She is also a member of the Get the Word Out Poetry Cohort and 5 over 50 Cohort of Poets and Writers in 2024. Her book was listed in Poets and Writers in the recent edition as one of the top 50 books of excellence in their debut. Looking to increase the visibility of poetry by BIPOC authors, she is the creator of the Smith Silva Challenge, which is a reading challenge that highlights poetry books by BIPOC authors. She has a PhD in Caribbean literature and language, which, by the way, I have a question for her later during our conversation about that will hopefully recommend some Caribbean writers, particularly poets, for us to further engage with. Today, we'll chat about An Inheritance of Drowning. In the striking debut, Dorsía Smith Silva explores the devastating effects of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, highlighting the natural world, the lasting impact of hurricanes, and the marginalization of Puerto Ricans. These poems also focus on the multiple sites of oppression in the United States, especially the racial, social, and political injustices that occur every day. Smith Silva writes with a powerful, gripping voice, confronting the drowning of disenfranchised communities as they are displaced, exploited, and robbed of their identities, but remain resilient. Written with unflinching language and vivid imagery, An Inheritance of Drowning reveals the many facets of the lives of marginalized people. To learn more about Dorsía and her work, please visit her website at dorsiasmithsilva.com. Throughout our time together, I'll be sharing links to her website, how to find her on Instagram, and also how to publish her book. So I want to shout out, because I've worked in Western Massachusetts for a very long time, this book and this conversation is going to be even more pivotal and important, as there are many people in Holyoke, Massachusetts, who were displaced by Hurricane Maria and migrated stateside to live and be welcomed by Holyoke, Mass. So this conversation, as the train passes, has even more significance as I'm sitting here thinking about it and preparing for our conversation. For those of you, I'm already new to this. I'm already in this. For those of you who are new to Black Writers Read, here's the format of our show. Dorsía will share excerpts from her work and we'll chat. If time remains at the end of the conversation, I'll open it up to Q&A with those who are joining us. I typically have people joining from Facebook and YouTube. If you have a question, please feel free to include it in the comment section on the platform you are joining us from today. I will compile the questions and see, because I've had some really great questions this past week that I inserted during the conversation. I'd now like to welcome Dr. Dorsía Smith Silva to the virtual stage.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for that wonderful introduction, and hello to everybody. Thank you so much. So much love for what you do, so much appreciation for what you do. I take my hat off to you because you do so much and your work is so needed for the community. So thank you from my heart. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Like I said, it's a pleasure and a deep honor to be here. Hello to everybody out there. I'm going to read some poems from my book, An Inheritance of Drowning. And as you mentioned, the poem looks at Hurricane Maria, the aftermath of that experience in Puerto Rico. It also looks at the racial, social, and political oppression that we're having right now in the United States, that we've been having for so long in the United States, and really looking at the links that we all have to the problem of climate change and how that really pushes us into this confrontation with what are we doing? We, all humans, what are we doing to try to, prevent climate change from endangering all of us? It's not too late, but we do need to be really vigilant about how we're going to move forward to combat it. So I'm going to read some poems from the book. The first poem is going to be called My Grandmother's Photo. I love this poem because we think about hurricanes, we think about the aftermath, but sometimes we don't really think about the things that we lose during a hurricane. People are always worried, oh, my furniture, oh, my documents. But what about the mementos that you lose and you'll never get back? Think of all those old photos that you have from your grandparents, from your ancestors. And if something happened to them, there's no replacement for those. So I was thinking of all of those things that get lost after a hurricane, especially those mementos that you can never get back. So this is called My Grandmother's Photo. My grandmother's photo. She smiles in black and white, cotton pleated dress with a thick belt, showing her newlywed 25-inch waist, a size 4. Long before the folds of stretched skin from 3 children, her ebony hair hangs in shiny cascading ringlets, held by a slip of red ribbon and crystal combs. Her hand is wrapped tightly around my grandfather's. New gold branding dirt, paid for by the wait and hot dawn mornings. With just one day, the rain washes out my grandmother's body and makes her a false whisper upon inspection. Brown dots replace her smile, and her hands are swallowed by dark spirals and bubbles. The thin edges fall into wrinkled tatters, sprinkles of paper breaking faster from sheets of water. The wind pushes her cracked and rearranged beside an overturned car, like a new broken flower in the grave. The next poem I'm going to read is called The Bee, and this is a Hurricane Maria poem as well, and this is based on a true story. So during Hurricane Maria, we had no power and no water. So we had to go around and, collect water as much as possible or buy water. And it also meant with no electricity, you had to hand wash your clothes. So I'm hand washing my clothes, hanging them outside on our towel rack, on our little lines outside. And one item, which was my tan brassiere, was hanging there. And there was this bee that was very insistent upon trying to pollinate my brassiere. And I kept, saying to this bee, go away, shoo, fly away. There's nothing there. There's nothing there for you to pollinate. It's just, just some cotton, just some stretch of fabric. And the poor thing looked so disoriented. It looked so, like not really sure what was happening. And I thought, wow, the hurricane just didn't affect us humans. It just didn't affect animals. It just didn't affect the landscape. It also affected insects, other creatures, the bees. They're wondering, well, where did the flowers go? Where did everything go? What happened to, my routine? So I wrote this poem because I realized we're all connected on that level. When a hurricane comes, it just doesn't affect humans. It affects all of us. All creatures on this earth get affected. So in that moment, I had such sympathy for that bee. And so I wrote this poem based on that moment. It's called The Bee. After Hurricane Maria, you spin in a daze, punch drunk from the fetid fumes of the generator. But you have made a decision to eat, live. You leap onto a dark tan bra that is widely flapping on the clothesline, eager to gather something sweet and bring it to the surface. And yet there's nothing there but a bare circle of cotton. You wonder how the hurricane galloped away with the flowers, triggering a vanishing act. Well, where is the magician's wand to bring back the canopy of blossoms? It must be in the wind of loss, along with the why and because. There is no way to tell you about the aftermath, slow cruelty. It is a tale that claws cell by cell, leaving wings to litter this earth. The next poem I'm going to read is for all those that have been displaced from their homelands. Many people had to leave Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria because they were displaced, because they lost their homes, they lost their jobs, they had to leave for safety. You think of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, those that had to leave New Orleans, not by choice, but because they were pushed out, forced out. For so many people right now that are experiencing that, this poem is for you. It's called the Q&A section. If you ask me why I left Puerto Rico, I would tell you that it wasn't because Hurricane Maria left me with a bloated album of waiting for the blackouts to skip between the trees. It wasn't because the roofs unfurled and the doors retreated to hollows somewhere in the sky. It wasn't because of the shells of water inching like new constellations across an endless night. It was the full circle of fear, the kind that stays in my mouth like neon jawbreakers, refusing to surrender, tailor-made to dislocate words that I long to speak. I dread colliding against this familiar when the memory gathers like burning hands around your throat. I'm going to read now a poem called Widows, and this is a poem that ends my book, In Inheritance of Drowning. I enjoy this poem because it talks about not only the resilience of Puerto Rico, but the resilience of so many communities that have been in a situation because of these natural disasters, because of racial, political, or social oppression, and they have tried to say, this is our way of showing our resistance. This is our way of pushing back. And when people say, well, you have agencies like FEMA, let me tell you, FEMA in Puerto Rico was very slow to respond. FEMA with New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina was also very slow to respond. So sometimes if you're waiting for these federal agencies to come and help you, you're going to be waiting for a while. So who helps you? The community. The community, we help each other. And this is exactly what happened in Puerto Rico. This poem is called Widows. Hurricane Maria made us all widows, but we didn't have to wear black. We were already in mourning, cells bathed in fight or flight, having lost everything to bits in battlefields of wind, rain, clapping. Then FEMA arrived with a box lunch and an IOU for a prepaid cell phone and debit card, forms to fill out for proof of home ownership, bank account, and identification before they would even consider our claims. The governor came with a caravan of camera crews and wanted to hear our stories, not the ones about huddling in a hot shelter with expired rice to eat, but the ones about Puerto Rico being the jewel of the Caribbean, the ones about our towns being open for business. For what can we widows do? Hurricane Maria smashed our prefrontal cortexes to whittles of dead air. It is mentioned that we are props flung against a landmark plot. The newspaper said that we cried. They didn't say that we woke up drowning. The next poem I'm going to read is a poem of my personal experience. My first name is Dorsía, and growing up, I got Dorissa, Dorothy, Doris, and I would always say, my name is Dorsía, but growing up, Black girl in a predominantly white classroom, I was told, by my parents, don't make too many, problems with the teacher. Just try to, get along and be along, as they would say. So I would have to try to figure out, how can I tell the teacher my name is Dorsía without being disrespectful, without being seen as, too combative. And it was a tricky, tricky balance. So this is my experience of how I lost my name. Your name, Dorsía, booms heavy like wide-eyed darkness, said my teacher, as if light sat on his tongue. So I became a ticker tape of nothing to be called and vanished in the famine sounds. My classmates backboned this death sentence and left no disguise of this invisible girl at an elbow distance who waited her turn, like being asked to slow dance against a backdrop of double-edged drowning. The next poem I'm going to read is called Ghost Talker Poem. This is for all the brown and Black girls that go missing and do not get the national attention they rightly deserve. It's really deplorable how so many BIPOC women in general go missing and never get national news coverage. This poem is for them. Ghost Talker poem. And for the Black girls that go missing from newspaper headlines and Spotlight 5 p.m. news, what happened to them? Kick the can over, see if the bones glint in the slips of sunshine. Press your ears against the grass. Listen to what bleeds. My mother in her lovely tongue. Those girls are probably with friends, hanging out in the basement, wearing cigarette pants. Cigarette pants were fashionable once. They will turn up like loose change, sidelined under sofa cushions, overdue books sandwiched in sweaters, favorite hairpins gagged by vents. Don't fret. Fret is a funny word for a young child. Sounds like forget. Don't forget, I won't, about the missing Black girls. Probably already dead in a ditch or a field somewhere. I'm not supposed to think about death, passing away, kick the bucket 6 feet under, meeting our maker, which is what my teacher said. The class guinea pig had stopped moving. Mrs. Hayes poked its feet and then shoved it into a shoebox, said that we could bury it across from the tire swing in the back of the schoolyard. The dirt was ordinary, brown, hard. Eat your snacks, said my mother. Twinkies from 7-Eleven, nothing from Superfresh or Pathmark. White filling, creamy like white fungus, oozing like zit pus, besmirching golden cake. The news says nothing about Black girls that go missing, not even a speck in someone's unread newspaper. Silence is when we inherit ghosts. I see them taking victory laps every night. The next poem I'm going to read is a poem that is talking about this migration crisis right now that we're in. So many people are leaving homelands for different reasons. Maybe they don't have access to clean water. Maybe they don't have access to a safe infrastructure. Maybe they had to leave because they don't have, jobs that are sustainable. Many people are leaving for different reasons, and they're leaving most of the time out of desperation. And when they are sent back, we have to ask ourselves, they're sent back, but how many then say there's nothing in my homeland for me to stay for? I'm going to then leave. So it's really looking in this poem at the cyclical nature of people that are displaced from their homelands for different reasons, that are pushed out from their homelands for different reasons, and that come to places like the United States and feel like we have to, have a place where we feel safe, where we have access to living wages. And what happens then when they are being, pushed back, thrown back in such a disrespectful manner, when they are being, taken in a sense that, they're being victimized, again. This poem is called Return. The river said, I'll protect you and give you shelter. So we migrants came. We traveled a long journey. The river carried us like familiar wind. Then we walked and dreamed of motionless water. Dreamed of water that said, welcome, come, come, come. Then they arrived with hanging scowls, arrived on horses long reined with whips, ran down our black bodies, trampled our faces, maimed our voices, made us turn our backs to water, told us water will not protect you here. This water does not belong to you. Your tears belong to you. That water is yours. That water should be plenty. Our tears scramble across miles. They get caught in many rivers, and our bodies keep drowning. We die in so many ways. They say we have no papers, no roots to dayfall here. As we are being sent back, we see the water below us on the plain. It tells us to return. Think of tendrils pushing through the muddy bottom. We can't look away. And I would like to read just 2 more poems. The next one, I wasn't planning on reading it, but I'm going to read it because of the discussion that we got into before we were actually having the interview. It's called Discuss It, and it really looks at the complexity of violence. You know, the United States was founded upon violence, you know, upon a war. And sometimes people say, well, we shouldn't have violence. And I tell them, civil rights came out of marches. The rights for women came out of marches. The rights for many people came out of marches. And it's really hard sometimes to just say, give me my rights. And for certain political powers to say, you're going to have those rights. We'll give them to you freely and willingly. And unfortunately, it has come to marches that have sometimes been ensconced with violence. And when people see the aftermath of that, you can look at that complexity of the history of violence, especially in the United States. Discuss it. I'm not saying violence isn't wrong, but I understand it. Mrs. Hayes is quick to remind us we should never put our hands on anyone. Violence is never the answer. Then she loads the projector. The film crackles on the screen of muskets and cannons, instruments from a war where the 13 colonies gained their freedom by killing men in red. Red like bright breasts of birds, red like big bone leaves on trees. Why couldn't they ask King George for their independence? Carol wants to know. Didn't they ask nicely? The film sputter turns to the Civil War and bombards us with red over blue and gray garments. Men getting pummeled and slaves hoping for a quilt work of freedom. Slaves that never had a prelude of asking nicely. Slaves that slept the dust in breath, while masters need them dreamless. Mrs. Hayes has her hands on her hips, like my own mother. When the guidance counselor told her that I would never get accepted by an Ivy League college, her eyes stripping Mr. Connor to a bare letter, his hands on my mother's shoulders, and the firm brushing away of fat fingers. The woman's patient chafed her legs, but not her voice. After 2 hours of waiting for the doctor, she screamed and pounded her fists at the counter. The doctor will see you now. The receptionist's eyes widened into black moons, then a buzz to let her through. The rest of us clutching our shell-shocked papers. The group of men circled the heart-shaped train rider until she spit-shined a knife and caught a rib. The men dodged like rodeo clowns. I think of my mother. The neighbors when they were told their children threw stones and dirt into our pool. My mother's tongue slicing them into a stroke ending. Her tongue taking the place of fists. Tell us when to send the cleanup crew, they said. I understand violence. It starts as the introduction to many wounds. You could press down hard enough if one bleeds. Ayana, Tatiana, Brianna, Fred, Malcolm, Martin, Medgar, Sandra, Trayvon, Yvette. They killed our best people until the mouths no longer hold stones. When the hands are pure, red will be a color as good, with good, across good. And the last poem I'm going to read is a poem that ends in positivity. It's not in the book. It came out after the book was published. I wish it could have been included in the book, but it's going to be in the second book. So stay tuned for that. So this is called G is for Greenhood. If you want to read it, it's published on the Terrain website. Terrain is a great, great journal which focuses on environmental writing. Again, you can find G is for Greenhood there. G is for Greenhood. For spring sitting on my shoulders, then fastening the eye level. Chanteuse gladiola spinning, bowing in the distance. Sense of greening until earth gets it right. green that I can't keep to myself. Say, green belongs within reach, like an extract of the sepal outside of the flower body. You wouldn't recognize me when I cradle green, for fear of it becoming worn in many places. Even when morning lurks upside down, green, not this green, never hurts. Ask the taracos giving off green among drizzled leaves. Ask the grasshoppers that throw themselves against grass because it glistens. Ask wet green in my blood that hasn't forgotten spared green across homeland, where your green overlaps with mine. Thank you all so much for listening. And again, my book is called In Inheritance of Drowning. Thank you.
Dorsía, Dr. Smith Silva. I have a question about craft too, but I hope you teach creative writing because structurally, I don't think you definitely have a style. Like, what I love about your poetry, and it reads differently when you hear it aloud. You have amazing structure. So you have like stanzas that reflect on the collective experience. You have stanzas that reflect on a very personal experience. And then you have stanzas that are bearing witness. And I'm just like, does she know? This is is this intentional? Like, wow.
Thank you. No, I have to say when I'm writing, it really is instinctual. I don't go and say like, okay, let me now have this here. It's just a flow and it just comes. And I'm like, let me just get everything out first and then come back and revise. Cause I think I'm a writer. If I revise as I write, it's like it's I'm too self-critical. I'm like, oh, this doesn't fit this. And I really feel as if then you're destroying the flow. Just get everything out first and then come back to it. And I wish I taught creative writing. My institution does not, unfortunately, have a creative writing program. So I teach literature. Nothing wrong with teaching literature, but I would love, love, love to teach creative writing, but my institution doesn't have that. So, when you're looking at being like, the pragmatic, way of life, it's like, well, I have a tenure track job. And then I just said, I'm just going to stay because I'm living I'm living in Puerto Rico. There's only so many institutions here. So unless I leave and move, and then I'm competing with so many other people, I have a tenure track job. Let me just stay in this lane and just move my way up. But the sacrifice is, yes, I mean, creative writing is my first love, but I'm not teaching that. I would love to do that and engage, but my institution is very old school in like teaching the bones of literature and analysis. And they're looking at creative writing like that's what you do on the side, but not in the forefront. Yeah, I know. It's a shame that creative writing doesn't get valorized as much as it should, but you have so many institutions, unfortunately, like mine. And I don't want to dismiss the University of Puerto Rico because it shines in so many different ways, but I think if they were really innovative, they would see all the benefits of creative writing and say, we should create a master's in creative writing. We should have all these programs, a bachelor's in creative writing. We should have more courses in creative writing, but they're really old school in the sense of literature and analysis, those traditional methods of teaching and learning. And yes, there's a time and a place for that, but there's so much too to be gaining from creative writing and from looking at poets and creative writers in general. I mean, I read everything. I mean, I read fiction. I mean, I read creative nonfiction. I read poetry, and I have learned so much from that. So I feel as if we're limiting, the brain, just the brain, but I feel like we're limiting students in general too, and ourselves as educators too, by not exposing students and ourselves to all literature. I feel like literature shouldn't be just, genre. It should be, here's the literature, go for it and see what you can, what you can gain from it. There's so much to be exposed. I mean, let me tell you, when I read Ngozi for the first time, my mind was blown. And Ngozi pretty much centers herself, and she has her essays, but she has fiction. And so, when I expose my students to that, they're like, we're doing essays? Like where does this come in? And I'm like, it links thematically, but I'm always trying to tell them, go beyond the genre that you feel comfortable with. You know, look at literature in a full spectrum. Don't have to limit yourself, because you never know what you're going to get out of this essay and how this essay links to others. I mean, if you look at Ngozie's essay, you know, We Shall Be Feminists, I tie that into Beyonce's video, because there's the Beyonce video where she's talking about Flawless, and there's a video, okay, that she did Flawless. And for those of you who don't know, there's a version of Flawless where the definition of feminist that Ngozi has in her essay, We Shall Be Feminists, that's in the Beyonce video. So my students were like, oh, you can link music and videos with literature? Yes. So when you're talking about poets, you know, different poetry, look at Kendrick Lamar. A lot of what Kendrick Lamar does is poetry. So it doesn't have to be like, oh, you know, this is a person over here. You can link it. This is interdisciplinary. This is transdisciplinary. This is multidisciplinary. And it's getting my students exposed to that. So I hope that, you know, when people look at literature, they just don't look at it in a vacuum. You can look at those that have come before, those that come after, and contemporary artists that are doing all of that.
Thank you so much for shouting out
You're
Kendrick
welcome.
Lamar, who,
Yes,
for
yes,
folks, got a Pulitzer for
yes,
writing. So,
yes,
yes.
yes. I mean, people don't realize like what he's doing is poetry. You know, people are like, oh, you know, he's just this. No, he got a Pulitzer Prize. I mean, which is amazing. And when you read his lyrics, if you just look at the page, that's poetry, and it's set to music. You look at what he's saying. There are so many layered messages in what he's saying. So sometimes people want to just say, oh, that's just one dimensional. No, it's multi-dimensional. You know, look at the complexity there. That's what's really amazing about what so many artists are doing. And I consider Kendrick Lamar a real artist. He's like a master of so many layers of the craft. It's amazing, really, because you look at it and you're like, wow, look at all this here. Let's analyze this. And then you think, well, this leads to this, and this leads to this. Exactly.
Yes.
So many layers of history, contemporary events. Love it.
Yes. So on to your book. I love this. Oh
Yes.
my God.
Yes. Plug it one more time to show everybody.
Yes. I'd love to know about the title, the origin story, and thinking about when Hurricane Maria happened, why this poetry collection right now, and also the title.
Okay, well, the book came about during a time where I was experiencing Hurricane Maria, and I remember it very well because my child plays basketball, and when we got the alert, we were actually in the southern part of the island, Ponce, for his basketball tournament. Shout out to little lads for all those that play basketball in Puerto Rico. So we were there and we were getting these alerts that a hurricane was coming, and I thought, this can't be right, because we had just had Hurricane Irma not too long before Hurricane Maria. So we're getting all these alerts. We're away from our home. And I thought, okay, this is a little strange, but maybe something's going to happen. Let's go get some extra supplies just in case. So we go to the store. It's like a big party. Everybody's there buying things. And we're like, hey, how's it going? Hey, how's it going? Because you see everybody that you know. We're all waiting in line. And I thought, let me go get some journals just in case I have some time to write. You know, just some old fashioned spiral notebooks, get everything. Sure enough, the forecast keeps saying Hurricane Maria is getting closer and closer. And I thought, oh, maybe we're actually in danger here. And then when they said we were really going to get hit, I started praying. Okay. And I started writing in my journal because I was really nervous and scared. I had been living in Puerto Rico at that time for many years. I moved to Puerto Rico in the year 2000. And and we had never had a hurricane warning that badly. We had had some moments of, no power, no water, but nothing since I had been living in Puerto Rico to completely destroy the entire island. Hurricane Maria cut right across the middle. So the whole island lost power. We were without water. Like the hurricane came a few days later, we were without water as well. So you're without water, you're without power, and you're thinking, okay, what do I do with myself? Because all of a sudden you're used to having this routine and everything just is disrupted. And so then you're thinking, okay, like how do I cook? We didn't have a generator. So then you're thinking, well, how do we get a generator? So your brain is like working in overdrive. You know, you're like, how do I get a generator? What about this? So I thank goodness we had my husband's cousin living in Florida. He sent us a generator. We picked it up at the airport. And people are like, well, why couldn't you get one in Puerto Rico? Because the lines were so long waiting for a generator. You're in that hot sun waiting in line, sweat dripping. And then what happened? Supply, okay, goes down, demand goes up. So then the prices go up because everybody wants a generator now. So then you're paying all this exorbitant amount of money for a generator. And we're like, you know, you're trying to rip us off. So thank goodness, shout out to my husband's cousin in Florida who sent us one through the mail. So we went to the airport to pick it up. And thank goodness the airport was pretty efficient. There were a bunch of people like us waiting at the airport for the generator. And so we got it, brought it home. And then once you had the generator, we didn't know, you know, okay, you can't hook it up to everything. So then you think like, okay, what are the main things that we need? Your refrigerator, you know, your basic supplies are hooked up to the generator, and then you need gas. So then you have to go and buy gas and keep the gas going. Or if you're very privileged, you can pay a company to bring gas to your home, but that was very, very expensive. So my husband went in the line like everybody else, fill up the gas tanks, and you learn, you know, how to maneuver the generator. And then there's the effects that come after, the noise of the generator, the fumes of the generator. You learn again that it has to be outside. So if it rains, you have to form some kind of MacGyver contraction so the generator doesn't get wet, because it can't be inside your home, because then you can die from the fumes. So then it has to be outside. So you're learning all this as you go. And then you're thinking, okay, we can buy water, but it gets very expensive to keep buying water all the time. So I'm writing all this in my journal because I didn't want to convey how stressed out I was, how nervous I was, how frightened I was, because the government had no answers. You're asking, well, when's the power going to come back? No answer. Well, when are we going to get our water back? No answer. You're waiting for news. Nobody knew anything. You know, nobody was telling you anything. So it was very frustrating. So all of that tension, anxiety, I'm just writing in my journal. Waiting in line at the supermarket, I'm writing in my journal because there's a long line, sweat just pouring down. And then you're not sure what's going to be the situation once you get inside the store. Because people think you can just go into the store when a hurricane comes. No, there's no power. So the store lets in very few people at a time for security reasons. And then once you get in the store, there's a moment where I really wanted fresh fruit. There were like 4 apples just open, sitting on top of an empty crate. And my son and I were like, well, we really want some apples, but we don't want to be greedy. We want to, you know, save some for other people. So, you know, we took, you know, like one for you, one for me, and we better savor these apples. And I told him, I said, well, they're open. We just don't eat the skin. I mean, all these things that you don't think about, like, okay, apples should be in a bag. Maybe we shouldn't eat the skin of this apple. Where these apples come from? But do you want these apples or not? I mean, all the things that are going through your head, and it's very fast. You know, you're like, do I want it or not? Grab it, because if you don't grab it, someone else is going to take it. And then once the debris in our area happen to be removed, then you could drive. But then there's no traffic lights because there's no electricity. So then you're negotiating with other people who goes first. And sometimes it's like a game of Frogger, because you're like, okay, there's still a little bit of debris over here. I don't want to go over these wires. I don't want to go over this tree. So you're trying to navigate. And I'm not used to driving like that. So I have a poem in the book about, you know, driving when there's no traffic lights, driving over wires. And then you're hoping, I hope nothing happens to my car while I drive over this. So all these fears were written in my journal, and I didn't return to it until much time later. And that's when I realized what I had written happened to be poetry. And I went to some workshops. I went to Bread Loaf. I went to Ten House, and I got wonderful feedback. I thank them so much. And that's when I realized I think I have a book. And it was my mentor really at Bread Loaf who said, I think you have, you know, a chapbook. And I said, I think I have a book actually, because I have all these poems. And I think my mentor, she has crossed over. Velma Pollard, who crossed over last year, but my mentor who told me, Dorsía, you have something special. Center your book around Hurricane Maria, builds upon that. And I thank her because as writers, I came in so green. I mean, I had published other things, but nothing like a creative writing book. And I thought, where do I go? What do I do? And CavanKerry had been on my list. They had a call for poets. I sent it in August. I got the call in December. I was still in consideration. I got the call in March that my book would be one of their books they would publish. But I was, overwhelmed because it had been a long time coming. As they say, I put my creative writing career on hold to become a full professor at my institution. And I knew I was going to title the book In Inheritance of Drowning because there's a poem in the book called In Inheritance of Drowning. But I was also thinking about the history of Puerto Rico being on paper. We are a territory, but in many ways it's a colony because the U.S. treats us like, third-class citizens. But I was also thinking about what does it mean to be a BIPOC person in the United States? I grew up in Philly, and I grew up at a time where there was racial, social, and political oppression. We're still seeing that. We're still having that. I mentioned in my poem about, growing up in Philly and the political bombing of MOVE. And if you don't know what that is, please look it up, because how we treat people, people that are marginalized, people that have been fighting back for years, this history of resilience. And I said, we've been, in this position where we're drowning, whether it's, with being marginalized, with being victimized. We're seeing it now with people, trying to express themselves and being told freedom of expression doesn't apply to you. We're going to arrest you. We've seen this, racial profiling, we've seen it. I mean, I grew up, stop and frisk was nothing new. We're seeing this now, and so when are we finally going to have equality? When are we finally going to say enough? I mean, people said, well, we had the No Kings protesting, happening the other day. And I said, okay, we need more of that. We need more of that. We need more moments of resistance. And resistance, as I said, doesn't always have to be your outside. Write a letter, teach your students, plant a tree. How are you helping your community? Do you have old books you can donate? I mean, there's so many ways you can participate in acts of resistance, but this is what we need to be doing more of if you can extend yourself to that. Because what I'm also seeing is in this history of drowning, we're feeling overwhelmed. We're feeling like, listen, my cup is empty. I can't do anymore because I've been doing it for years. And I see that, I recognize that. So if your act of resistance is self-love, if your act of resistance is like, look, I'm going to read a book for myself, I'm going to be writing a letter to myself, that's your act of resistance. Self-love is resistance. Survival and loving yourself, especially in these moments, that's resistance for so many people. And so I'm hoping through this book, we can really generate a social transformation. I'm hoping, like I say in the beginning of the book, when we have our children, when we sit down with ourselves, we say, what have we inherited? Love. Love for ourselves, love for community, love for each other. I'm hoping we'll get to that point. And it's challenging because, I sit down with my child and I tell him, in Puerto Rico, you're loved and all this, but in other communities, you're going to be seen as a threat. And it's a shame, but this is why. This is what has come before you, and this is what is still there. We're in the midst of this right now. And it's one of those moments where we can't afford to be naive. We can't afford to think like we have overcome all of this because we're still trapped up in the middle of this. So In Inheritance of Drowning is coming out of that. I'm hoping, what I see in my next book, I'm hoping to see more of a social transformation. I see us making gains, but I think in so many ways, I was listening to D'Angelo's Black Messiah, and he said that album came out of, we're still in the same SHIT, and I still feel that way. We're still in the middle of it, and it's frustrating. It's so frustrating when I see people saying, well, racial profiling, that's nothing different than what I grew up with. You know, being a Black person, you know, you knew if you went to certain neighborhoods, you were going to be at risk. You knew if you were going in this, you know, street corner, be careful because the police could be on you because you look this way. I mean, there were so many times where you just had to, you know, your inner monologue would say, this is what I'm going to do if I'm harassed. You know, and you just had to have it in your head. You couldn't afford to be naive and say, no, I'm just going to go here. Nothing's going to happen to me. So we're seeing this now where so many people have to warn their kids or have to warn themselves. If I go here, I could be a victim today. I could be arrested today. And what do you do in those situations? Do you know your rights? We're seeing this now. So 2025 is really nothing, you know, so much hasn't really changed. It's really, for me, I'm thinking this is nothing different than, you know, how I grew up in so many ways. Sad, but true.
Yeah, so this transitions so nicely into the next question. And I love that you read poems that situated your circumstance during Hurricane Maria. And I love too talking about yourself, your location growing up, and now your son's location growing up and now, and all these things. So, in terms of author subjectivity, and this question, especially for poetry, is extremely important. And I'm going to put out there now because this is so I didn't start off in poetry. I actually started off in music, then theater,
Oh, wow.
then poetry. And the critique I've always had about poetry until I read other BIPOC authors is this writing as an outsider and writing from a place of naivety, of I can enjoy this from a distance. And I had the hardest time connecting to poetry until I read Audre Lorde. That was the very first poet where I was like, oh, you can actually write from the eye. And you do that so well. So my question is, in terms of author subjectivity, as a woman of multiple intersecting marginalized communities, can you talk about the feminine and maternal aspects of writing on location history and trauma? And and if you could talk more about this, how has your own subjectivity informed your writing?
Yes, definitely. Well, growing up in Philadelphia, you know, then we moved later to Arizona, and then I think I mentioned to you, I went to college in Virginia. I also went to University of Michigan. And then coming to Puerto Rico, I knew, you know, from the community in Puerto Rico, I thought, you know, children in general are loved here in different ways, you know, and I see that the closest I would say to that is, you know, when you look at like the Black Southern culture, how people are like, come on over here, baby, give me some sugar, you know, and it's like they love kids. But so many other places, it's like, you know, children should be maybe seen, but definitely not heard. And raising a Black male child, you know, my child is, you know, part Black, part Puerto Rican, but raising him here in Puerto Rico, I mean, he is loved. I mean, he grew up hugging his teachers, you know, being told you're beautiful, you know, and I thought, having him raised here, it's so different. Like when we travel to the States, I have to remind him, like, listen, you know, depending on where we go, they may see you as a threat. And it's hard for him sometimes to wrap his head around that because he has grown up here with so much love. And I always tell him, this was one of the best things I could ever do for you, was to grow up with that kind of love, that kind of community, that kind of self-confidence. Like you could take on the world because you grew up entrenched in that here, you know? And I always tell him, no matter where you go, no matter what you do, this is your homeland. You can always return to that, and try to have him remember all of that, because sometimes growing up, you know, there are so many factors, so many influences that are always telling you, you know, you're less than, or you're not equal to, or you should strive to be, you know, this, why aren't you like this, you know, all these conflicting messages. And I said, here, you know, there's none of that, because this, you're learning your history here, you're learning all this. Sometimes growing up, it was like a fight, you know, to read Black authors. You know, it was a fight to see us on the bookshelves. My parents always took us to the public library, and they always took us. Here is Maya Angelou. You know, here is Audre Lorde. You know, you're going to be exposed to this. But my parents did that. You know, my education was really Eurocentric, you know, and it wasn't until I was sitting in, you know, African American literature classes, you know, Black women literature classes, where I was like, where have you been? Sisters, brothers, where have you been? You know, and so I was so happy to have a PhD program that was centered in what? Looking at Black Caribbean authors. You know, you're looking at us here in the Caribbean. And I was like, you know, again, mind blown, because I thought, where have all these people been? And then you start looking at the connections. You start looking at, you know, Black British authors, Black authors in Canada. You start realizing we are all over. You know, how come I wasn't exposed to this earlier? And I think it's because certain parts of the United States, certain pockets, it's so Eurocentric. So you could be learning about Shakespeare, but you're not looking at all of the writers, especially Black writers, that were influenced by Shakespeare and that took, you know, The Tempest, looking at, I mean, there's literature about Caliban. And you're like, oh, wait a minute, people are writing about Caliban, and these are Black authors. Where have you been? You know, and people talking about, well, I was influenced by this, but I took it and made it my own. And that's where we should be headed, having a more well-rounded education, moving that needle to include all of us. So I knew as a mother, I have to expose my child to all of this. So when I talked to him about my travels throughout the Caribbean, I'm telling him things. I'm like, you know, I did my research on, my dissertation was on V.S. Naipaul, but it meant I had to travel a lot to Trinidad and Tobago, but mostly Trinidad. So I told him, I was like, going to Trinidad, seeing Carnival, seeing us at Carnival. I was like, it's beautiful, it's amazing. And then you look at the food. There's so much connection to food between the cultures. There's so much similarity in island, you know, behavior. You know, so I told him, I'm like, in that sense, we're so connected. And when I went to Trinidad, people were like, you're not from Trinity. Are you sure you're not from Trinity, you know? And I was like, no, I'm not Trinidadian, you know? And they were like, really? You look like one of us. And I'm like, that kind of sense of community, beautiful. And so I told him, like, when you travel out the Caribbean, especially, you'll see we're more similar than not. But you don't know that until you travel. And being here, I watch the Caribbean news. I find out so many more, you know, I find out so much information that connects us than just watching the American news. Because, for instance, they were talking about these new, you know, these new taxes, you know, all these, you know, import fees. But it was so interesting how that affects the Caribbean. So I'm watching the Caribbean news, and the Caribbean news is saying how they're trying to avoid the ports in Florida, in Miami, and they're trying to look at ports in South America so they don't have to go through the US because of those fees. I found that fascinating. And I said, that's the news that we're not getting in the US, how certain communities are saying, you know what, US, you're trying to make us pay by inflicting all these heavy import fees, all these tariffs. We're going to go around you. And this is how. And this is how it affects the Caribbean. And I thought, people don't understand the Caribbean. You know, these people sometimes don't have the money to be paying these high import fees. You know, Puerto Rico, for one, our food here is very expensive. The goods here are very expensive because everything has to be shipped in. So we don't have a choice because we're a territory of the, you know, really a colony of the United States. We have no choice in that matter. If we could, we would be trying to negotiate with like all these other islands. How can we get, you know, cheaper goods? Because we, the people, we pay for that. So who wants to pay $8, $9 for a canister of strawberries? Nobody. But that's what we're forced to do because all our food gets shipped in. It's very, very expensive living in Puerto Rico. And that's the other side that people don't, you know, talk about either. You know, we're this paradise, but it's very expensive to live here. I think it would be similar to that discussion of Hawaii. When you go to Hawaii, it's very expensive. Most people there that stay there, unless you're like a rich person, you have 2 or 3 jobs. It's very hard to make a living because the cost of life, the cost of living, it's so high, you know, these exorbitant prices. So getting back to the book and the title, I knew I really wanted to center the history of drowning, but I also knew I wanted to focus on what would come out of that, the social transformation, the love we have for each other. As a mother, I think like the most political thing I could ever do for my child, the highest act of resistance was to say, I'm going to have you raised in Puerto Rico, where you would be centered in a community of love, and to have you be a strong male in that sense, so that you don't have all this noise in the back. You don't have the fear in the back. You don't have, I mean, here there, yes, you have some encounters with police, but it's nothing like I could die if I get pulled over. So I said, being raised in that sense where you have such a strong sense of yourself and less fear of those interactions, that's the kind of child I thought, I would love for you to have that kind of childhood. I would love for you to be centered in that. So for me, the biggest act of resistance was saying, I'm going to move to Puerto Rico. I'm going to live here. I'm going to stay here. I had a choice. My husband said I can move to the States or you can move here. My husband is from Puerto Rico. And I said, I'll move to Puerto Rico, and my life then became centered here. And I'm, writing about my experience. The book is centered in what I went through, but as many writers have said this, and Reginald Bates has said, there are so many eyes when you are writing, and so the one eye, it's like a part of you, but there's also multiple eyes. So that is what I'm also writing through. It's like I'm writing, this is my authentic self, but there are many authentic selves when I write. So I'm writing from my experience, but there are also many other parts of me too that I'm centering as well. And I'm also thinking too of different communities when I'm writing. But all that, again, it's like very intuitive. When I write, I'm not thinking like, okay, self, write about this part of you. I'm just writing, and then later when I revise is when I'm like fine tuning it. But still, I'm always writing with that idea in mind, like this is a story that I want to tell that has to be told, and that's what really grounds me.
Yes, I hope you write a memoir or an
Oh, thank
autobiography
you.
because
Thank
you
you.
got, yeah.
Thank you. I'm inspired. I mean, Audre Lorde sits on my desk and I'm always like, hi, Audre, because I feel that she was just so unafraid. She had so much confidence just to say, this is what needs to be said, put it on paper,
Yeah.
don't worry about it. And I always try to channel her, because sometimes you're like, ooh, this is so political, but then it's like, just put it out there, because I have the poem in my book, Drowning in 5 Parts, which ends with a profanity. And I don't normally use profanity, but that poem called for it. So there was a part of me that was like, oh, I don't know if I should keep that in there. But I'm like, you know what? Authentic self, Audre is talking to me. Audre says, keep it in there. Don't police your own self. But I did have that moment where I thought, oh, this is profanity. It ends the book. Maybe that's a little bit too much, too raw. But that's what, when I was writing the book, that's what came to me. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to keep it in there. Because the whole idea of respect and respectability politics and how we as a people get caught up in that whole thing, it is, it plays with your mind, it plays with your life. And that whole thing, it is, the profanity, it's this MF, that word. And that's what I was thinking. And I was like, respectability politics, you can't win when you buy into that, the whole idea of, well, speak well, dress well. Because who are you doing this for? You're doing it for people that normally are never going to respect you. And once you buy into that game, then it's a losing market, because there's never going to be, you can never dress well enough. You can never speak. I put this in quotes. You can never speak well enough, because they're always going to find some yardstick to measure against you. So that whole idea about, people saying, oh, Black people, if you just, were respectable when you were encountering the police, you can't win. If you were dressed in a business suit, you wouldn't get profiled. You can't win. You can be dressed in, Gucci. You could be speaking, the Queen's English, and they'll still find a reason, to say you were at fault. You know, so that's why I said respectability at the end of that poem. Respectability, it's the MF word, because it's a losing game for us when they already have a built-in yardstick that you can never win. You can never win, according to those people, because their whole objective is to keep you oppressed. So when that's their end objective, no matter what you do, you can do 1 through 100, and they'll say, well, what about 101? So it doesn't matter. They're still going to find something to say, no, you know, we're not going to treat you in an equal manner. We're going to treat you in a way that shows that we are the oppressor. You're going to be marginalized, you know. And I put this all in quotes because that's for those people that are engaged in that. It's just unfortunate that sometimes those people interact with our community.
Oh, segue so nicely into the next question. I'm getting lost in this. I'm like, wait, I'm supposed to be interviewing, but I'm learning. I need to be taking. I'm like, what is happening? Oh my gosh. Ooh. So I love that what the poet is supposed to write about a hurricane is available through the Academy of American Poets online. It reads like a craft essay and as bearing witness, passing the baton to others to write on such catastrophic events. As an educator, how do you see others learning to write from poems such as this and also some of your other work? I can easily see this poem continuing on with other writers, contributing what and how they see and experience the aftermath of such a life-changing event. Like I literally can see it as a book, like an anthology, and people continuing.
Oh, that's
to
a wonderful
write.
idea.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful idea. I see this poem that opens the book. You know, it's an Ars Poetica poem. For those that don't know, Ars Poetica, it's a poem that's about writing itself. And I think sometimes as writers, especially as Black writers, especially as Black women writers, you may have an encounter where you're in a workshop or you have an instructor and they tell you, maybe you shouldn't write about that. Or I can't really understand that. What are you trying to get with that? And it can be so diminishing. I didn't take a lot of creative writing classes as an undergrad, but I did take one. I won't mention the instructor's name, but this instructor was a very well-known poet, won many awards. And I wrote this poem in undergrad, and I was workshopping it. And he was very appalled by this poem. And the poem looked at nuances between a mother and child, but it also was layered with race. And he was like, you're doing too much in the poem. I don't know why you're mentioning race. I mean, he was really, really dismissive. And it made me feel really small. And because he was so up here, he had won all these awards. He was this big time, you know, poet. And I thought, well, he must know what he's talking about because he's this big nine poet and he's won all these fancy awards. And here I am, just an undergrad student, and he's telling me I'm doing too much in the poem. Maybe I am. And it made me really cautious about putting in race in a way in a poem. And it wasn't until years later, because after that, I didn't take another creative writing course because I was so dismayed by that course. And then I went to graduate school, and then I later, you know, and I just never took a creative writing course until many years later when I went to Bread Loaf. And then it was like the opposite. Then it was like, you're doing your thing. Yes, yes, yes. And I was like, oh, okay, positive affirmation. Okay, good. You know, and at that moment though in my life, I felt like I don't really need your positive affirmation because I'm going to do it anyway. So I would tell writers, write what you want and really do not be dismayed by people that have won awards, people that have told you like, well, I'm, you know, this poet and I've been recognized by the Academy. Write what you want because it's your voice and it's your story. Those are your words on the page and they have merit. So I would tell writers, write what you want. You have a voice, use it, and don't be afraid to use it because who else is going to tell your story? And that's Ngozi again, the danger of the other story. Who else is going to tell your story but you? If you don't tell it, then you're letting other people tell your story for you. And you probably aren't going to be happy when they tell your story because it's going to be a skewed story. This story that is probably one-dimensional, right? Why not tell your own story? And when you're writing about trauma, you're writing about natural disasters, you're writing about whatever it is that you want to write about. But there can be a beauty, because people say, oh, you're writing about such sadness, you're writing about this, but there can be beauty in that. And that's what I'm hoping in that first poem. People can see the craft and the beauty of writing about really painful moments. And you don't have to write about painful moments, but if that's what you want to write about, you can do it. And Patricia Smith is a wonderful Black poet, who has written about horrible moments, especially Hurricane Katrina, and you see the beauty and the craft in the work. So it's not just a matter, because some people say, well, I never experienced anything painful. It's not just writing about something painful, it's writing about it in a way that reflects the craft. So that's the work that you have to put in as the writer. But can you do it? Of course you can do it. And you manifest all of that onto the page. And then you let the reader do the rest of the work. So I've gotten people, they'll read the poem and they'll look at different things. And people will say, well, how did this poem manifest? And I thought, well, when we're thinking about the environment, I said it would be nice to write about the environment without thinking about hurricanes, without thinking about climate change. And I said, especially for the marginalized, I said, you have many pockets of the communities, Puerto Rico, the rest of the Caribbean, New Orleans, people in Florida, people in Texas. We're very vulnerable to climate change because of hurricane season. And I said it would be wonderful to have, a different story where hurricane season comes every year, June through November, and we're writing about it in a way where we don't have to be worried when we look at the Doppler radar, when we look at the hurricane map. We could just be thinking, okay, hurricane season, no big deal, but we're not in a position for that. So it's also getting us to think about, what are we, community, we, the collective we, what are we doing as a community so that we don't have these hurricane seasons that are so active, because it really makes us even more vulnerable. And unfortunately, the marginalized, those that get affected and they can't afford the generator, they can't afford to have their medicine not be refrigerated. They can't afford to go buy water. They're waiting for the water truck, but then they're thinking, wait a minute, where's this water coming from? But they don't have a choice. Because they can't afford to buy water. I mean, that was my whole thing too. People don't think about it. This water in this water truck, but where does this water come from? It's this clean water. Is this water safe? I mean, if you're really desperate, you're not thinking of all that. You're just thinking, hey, I need water. I'm going to, take it. And there's no electricity, so you can't boil it ahead of time. I mean, all these things that people don't think about, that people have to endure after a hurricane. So who's going to be affected? Unfortunately, a lot of the marginalized, and sometimes the marginalized community, it's more of us. So I'm always thinking about that too when I'm writing too. Like, how is this affecting the different communities? What does it look like for brown and Black people? How can we have, social transformation? What would that essentially look like? And how can we get there?
Oh, yes. This question I've been so excited about, because I feel like I'm not saying that you're the end all be all, but so I'll tell this quick story. I didn't realize the breadth and the richness of Caribbean literature until, I'm going to shout out Dr. Rachel Mordecai, who teaches at UMass Amherst. I took a couple of classes with her during my MA program. And then Donna Hemans, who was on season fiction writer from Jamaica. She was on season 3, I believe. And we talked a lot about just within that part of the diaspora. It is its own diaspora because of the richness within that. So, how is your doctoral work and scholarship, being a PhD in Caribbean literature and language, inform your approach to creative writing? And then, who are some poets from this particular region in the diaspora you go to for inspiration, and who should we be reading?
Yes, well, my mentor, as I mentioned, she crossed over last year, but Dr. Velma Pollard, deeply influential in my work. She, poet, creative writer, also penned some essays, really fundamental to my writing. And just to give you a quick backdrop, I went to a conference in St. Thomas many years ago. Velma was the guest speaker, and our rooms were right next to each other, and Caribbean style, just so friendly. And I told her, I said, Velma, at that time, Dr. Pollard, I said, I want to write a book. And she said, well, let's keep in touch. I really thought she was being nice. You know, people say all the time, keep in touch, but she literally meant it. We emailed each other. Oof, I met her back in, I think it was like 2005, maybe even 2004. Anyway, when I met her in 2004, emailed each other until she crossed over last year. Emailed each other. She sent gifts to my son. Whenever she would come to Puerto Rico, she would stay with me or visit me. She would always say, you have to come to Jamaica. She was Jamaican. Always come to Jamaica, you know, and she was just the, you know, the friendliest person and most giving. And when it came time for writing advice, when I was working on my dissertation, and I would say, Velma, I'm so tired, she would cheer me on. When I was in the woes of going for tenure, she would cheer me on. And so it was in that spirit of you know, Caribbean Black women looking out for each other, nurturing each other, that she reminded me of the purpose and the sense of community, that richness of community. And I thank her because when I was in the middle of, you know, preparing this book, In Inheritance of Drowning, and I was like, I'm not sure what poem is going to go where, she would always talk, you know, talk to me very calmly and say, Dorsía, you got this. And so you need those people in your life to say, you can do this, that cheer you on. Because, you know, to your family, you know, sometimes your family, they just want to nurture you. They're like, oh, baby, don't worry, you know. But Velma would always, you know, Dorsía, you got this. You keep working. You have a deadline. You got this. Because I would say, Velma, I'm not sure what I'm doing. You got this. You can do it. You can do it. And so from one writer to another, I really appreciate her advice and just motivating me to always do my very best work. And I definitely recommend for those people to read Velma's work. One of her best stories that won an award is Carl. She has a book of poetry, Shame Trees Don't Grow Here, among many books, but I really love Shame Trees Don't Grow Here. She looks at the not only the literature of the Caribbean, but also the linguistic range of Caribbean literature. Sharon McCollum is another one that I also love. Her most recent book is No Ruined Stone. I love Dion Brand. She has been moving back and forth from the Caribbean as well as to Canada. If you look at Lorna Goodison, it's like, it's really hard to step away from Caribbean literature without reading a Lorna Goodison poem or book. She's just everywhere in Caribbean literature. So Lorna Goodison as well. I also recommend, and I mentioned this poem, this person in my book, In Inheritance of Drowning, Imner Philip. I cannot recommend Imner Philip enough. Her book, Zong, was monumental to me. If you haven't read Zong, it's a true story about slaves that were thrown overboard. And they were thrown overboard to collect the insurance money because they were worth more dead than, you know, taken to their final destination alive. And what she does in that book is she channels the spirits of the ancestors. She channels those that were on that boat. And what she does linguistically, she fragments words. She has shading. She has erasure so that everything is layered in that book with multiple meanings. That book was, as I mentioned, revolutionary to me because I never knew you could do all that on a page. And I tried to channel some of that in my book by playing around with spacing the white page. And I thought, wow, if a poet could do this on paper, maybe I could emulate that just a little bit, you know, channel that just a little bit. So those are the poets that I would definitely recommend as a starter. There are many more, but as a starter, those are my top. You know, you really have to look at those poets as a top. Caribbean literature is really rich. If you're looking into fiction, I know many people love to hate this person, V.S. Naipaul, but I have to say he's a very gifted writer. And Miguel Street is a book. It's a short book, a novella. And I recommend that book because it really, for me, looks at the different aspects of the Caribbean, the themes that are important to the Caribbean, and what he does in that short, you know, short little volume of short stories, which are all connected by characters that live on Miguel Street or have access to Miguel Street, is really a master lesson in craft. And when I think of prose poems and how they link to poetry and how they link to fiction, I think of that book, because poetry doesn't just have to be, just genre of a bunch of stanzas. You can have blocks of poetry. And so when I think of what Naipaul does in Miguel Street, I think of how you can perhaps have conversation in poetry, how you can have, characters in poetry. Poetry, you can expand the meaning of traditional poetry. So I like to look at that book and think of, what I can do with poetry, kind of expand what people normally think poetry should be in this box. No, you can expand it to different, elements. Don't be afraid to use the white space on the page. So I also recommend, it's not poetry, but I do recommend Miguel Street by B.S. Naipaul.
Prior to having our guests on Black Writers Read, we ask each of them why they write. Here's what you offered. I write because writing is political. It is a call for action. It is necessary like breathing.
Mhm.
Writing is the lifeblood. To be an author during this time is essential. With all of the heavy oppression and marginalization,
Yes.
I find myself writing to encourage social transformation and dismantle political, social, and racial injustices. I think my work is essential because it gives a voice to communities that too often go unheard and unnoticed. Sometimes people are unaware about the colonial history of Puerto Rico and the United States and the deep legacy of discrimination against Black and Brown people in the US. Hopefully, people will have a greater understanding of these significant issues after reading An Inheritance of Drowning. Hopefully, they will also think about the significant relationship with the environment as well.
Mm-hmm.
For others who wish to write on and about Puerto Rico, what is your advice? What approaches should others take, and what themes should be highlighted in these works? And who should the ideal audience be for this work?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, first, thank you for those lovely questions, and thank you for reading that. I want to plagiarize myself. I'm like, I said that. That was so beautiful.
Yes, you did say that.
That was
Yes.
amazing. I'm proud of myself for saying that. Thank you so much again for these wonderful questions. Writing about Puerto Rico, I would say for those that want to write about Puerto Rico, of course, to be tied to thinking about Puerto Rico. For me, I mean, it's really. It's a political statement because I have friends that are Puerto Rican and they live outside of Puerto Rico and they come to Puerto Rico as much as they can. And there's this divide between those that live in Puerto Rico and those that are outside of Puerto Rico. And can they really understand what's happening here in Puerto Rico? I could only speak to my experience. I've been living in Puerto Rico since 2000. And sometimes to really understand the issues, it's living here because we are in it every day. And also being a professor at the UPR, I mean, there are certain issues that I deal with that my husband, he doesn't understand because he remembers the UPR from when he went yesteryear. And I'm telling him, I'm like, no, we don't have resources. No, we have mold on the ceilings. No, we don't. And he's like, what are you talking about? It wasn't like that 20 years ago. It wasn't like that. And I'm like, but this is what we're dealing with now. I'm like, higher education is under attack now. So it's really hard for him sometimes to understand, those issues because he doesn't see it. I mean, he's looking at a different world. And so sometimes when I have friends that are coming in, they stay for a period too, but then they leave. They don't understand either because they may come for the beach, they may come for the food, but I'm like, listen, this is what's happening now. But I also think you could be living here in Puerto Rico and only live in a closed neighborhood. Only see, the benefits of Puerto Rico. You can live in a bubble in Puerto Rico and choose to live in a world where you're thinking, well, what do you mean people are suffering? I don't see that. What do you mean? People are being pushed out, the gentrification. I don't see that. And there is, we have that here in Puerto Rico too, where people, are, what I would consider, very much in a bubble because they just go from, a very privileged, neighborhood house to very privileged grocery store. But you have other, people where they're in the grocery store, and I've seen this, and they're like, wait a minute, how much is that meat? I got to put that back. And they put it back because they can't afford that. you know, or I'm talking to my hairdresser. My hairdresser's like, I can't afford to go here anymore. I have to go to this store because I got these kids at home and I'm only making this much and I got this and I got this and I got this. Or I'm talking to, you know, I talked to my student the other day. My student said, you know, I'm supporting myself. So I'm a student and I'm working and I got this job and I got this job and I have to pay for this, this, and this, and this. And, you know, it's very hard for me. And I thought to myself, you know, sometimes students fall asleep in class, not because they're staying up late, you know, on the phone or out at a club or out watching a movie, but because they're working, and they're working not because they have a choice, but because they have to pay tuition. And you think, well, where's the financial aid? Where's the scholarship money? Where's this? It's not enough. And so I'm always thinking about that when I'm writing. So I would tell people, do your research, try to stay in Puerto Rico as much as you can, get to know different communities, push yourself to get to know the communities, get to know people, different ranges of experience. And if you want to come, I mean, Puerto Rico, it's a beautiful island, but of course, you have to be prepared for Puerto Rico, because sometimes people think, well, it's just paradise. There are pockets of Puerto Rico that are very expensive and people are not prepared for that. You know, there are pockets of Puerto Rico where you will need a car because public transportation may not be reliable, or you're going to be waiting in the very hot sun with no shade, you know, and you're going to be waiting for a very long time because the bus schedule may not be reliable. So it's to understand all these things. And people say, well, why isn't the bus schedule reliable? Why is there a lack of infrastructure? Where's the money? You're preaching to the choir here. Go back to the U.S. government. Go back to the people that were elected in the leadership. And when we were thinking of, you know, Bad Bunny, because many people are like, well, Puerto Rico, Bad Bunny. Yes, Bad Bunny is very popular now, but there are also artists who came before Bad Bunny. So start looking at the other artists who came before Bad Bunny. Really look at the artists that have been historically, you know, linked to Puerto Rico. So I would say do your research, study. Don't be afraid, if you're not sure, to reach out to people that can guide you. Many, many years ago, I co-taught a course on reggaeton at the UPR, which was so much fun. But you know, a lot of those artists have changed. For instance, Daddy Yankee has now, you know, he's looking at religious music. You don't hear much about, you know, Tego and Evie Queen that much anymore. But looking at them, I would say they kind of merged politics in with what we're seeing with music. So that kind of set the platform for someone like, you know, Bad Bunny. You know, Calle 13 set the platform for someone like, you know, Bad Bunny, where you're looking at not only the lyrics, the music, but you're looking at Puerto Rico and moving it towards the push for independence. And why is that so important? Well, because we're in a situation now where statehood, what kind of state would we be? Would we be like a Hawaii? If we are what we are now, which is this territory, which is really functioning more like a colony, there's a lack of rights, a lack of respect. And if you're pushing for independence, well, look at the other islands in the Caribbean that have become independent. Look at what they endured, what was the cost, and what is the aftermath. And I think back to certain people who have said, you know, what price would you pay for your freedom? And I think it was Shakur, the one who just recently passed away, who said, the only thing you have to lose for freedom are your chains. So I think, you know, in the sense of Puerto Rico, I would be concerned, though, because you don't want it to be like a Haiti where you have to pay all this money and then end up in debt for your freedom. But I would say, you know, most people are really thinking, what would it look like if Puerto Rico would be independent, if Puerto Rico was free? You know, because then we could make our own decisions. Then we could, you know, really not be under the thumb, under the boot of the United States. So I think studying that movement, studying where Puerto Rico was going, and really looking at the revolution of a lot of young people, because I think Bad Bunny is tapping into something. People are really unhappy with the current situation. So then it becomes, well, what are you going to do about it? You know, because and it's like this in the States too. People are unhappy with the Democratic Party, but what are you going to do about it? Are you going to hold these people accountable? Are you going to start a new party? You know, and so people are saying, you know, what's it going to, you know, manifest? What social transformation are we going to move ourselves into? So I think that's where we're headed. You know, when people are saying, well, people are not really voting for my best interest, well, then what comes next? And I think that sense of, you know, discontent, you know, it's building. So where do you go from there?
Oh, this conversation is about to come to an end because I just only have one last question for you. Because
Okay.
I feel like you and I can even do like an entire podcast just
Oh,
on.
yes. Oh, yes, Nicole. Invite me back, please. Anytime. I'd
Oh,
love to come back.
of
Yes.
course.
Anytime. Anytime.
Yes. What is next for you, Dr. Dorsía Smith Silva, and how can the Black Writers Read community support you on this journey?
I will be in New York next month. So please come out. Yes, please come out and see me next month. I have some engagements. So please follow me on Instagram. Check out my website. I'll be posting all that information, but I'll be in New York. I have some readings in New York. I'll be at AWP. So if you're going to hang around in Baltimore, you're going to be at AWP, please come and say hello. You can always support me, of course, by buying my book. Okay, it's available on all different kinds of platforms. Bookshop right now has a link with Split This Rock. So Split This Rock is doing some really important work. So if you want to support Split This Rock and Bookshop, please go through Split This Rock's website to support them through Bookshop and buy my book. Of course, it's also on other platforms. I know some people have issues with Amazon. So if you're one of those people who have issues with Amazon, then you can go to Bookshop and order it there. And just, you know, I'm always welcome, you know, send me a hello, follow me. I'm always interested in, of course, knowing what you're up to. If you are an educator, have your students buy my book, teach my book in your classes. And if you are just looking for a good book to read, you know, again, my book, An Inheritance of Drowning, I hope that you enjoy it. Let me know.
Yes.
And oh, I forgot.
Yes.
My challenge, the Smith Silva challenge, will be starting next month. So please follow me as I highlight other books of poetry by BIPOC authors. Follow me and let me know, please, if you have recommendations. I would love to support, you know, authors that are poets and that are BIPOC poets. Let me know. I would love to buy their work and support them and give them a shout out as I do the reading challenge. And if you participate in the reading challenge, please let me know. I would love to highlight what you're doing as well.
Oh, Black Writers Read and the Smith Silva Challenge. I see a lot.
Yes, please.
I'm looking at a lot of stuff.
I would love to highlight authors that I may not be aware of. I keep a pulse normally on different writers, but if there's especially a poet that has new work out that I'm not familiar with, please let me know. I would love to buy that book and highlight that poet for the Smith Silva Challenge. Please let me know.
Yes, let's offline because I would love for Black Writers Read to participate.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Please, let me know. Yes, let me know.
Yes. So Dorsía, it was so lovely finally
getting
the chance. Yeah, to chat with you in real time because we followed each other on Instagram for a long time.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. And I love this conversation. Anytime you want to chat, let me know.
Oh, trust me. I'm like, especially like when it comes to academia, because I just quickly, before we wrap up, many of my besties, they have since left academia. They were tenure track and everything. And me, what's interesting, I did it the other way around. I worked in education in the nonprofit sector as an administrator. I did a lot of years in live event production in the arts, went back, got my doctorate, and I was teaching adjunct along the way. And now I'm trying to enter in academia in this way. I want to teach at community colleges and with adult learners. Like that is something, and it's something that I literally have had people reflect back on me like this whole, and that's a whole other conversation about how today's traditional student has changed. And I'm just like,
Yes.
I can't deal with that. So I feel like you and I have another conversation coming up
Yes.
about that.
Oh, yes. Yes. But I would say thank you so much for, you know, all that you're doing, because you're really doing amazing work. And I know people leave the academy all the time, but I also feel like a little bit of like there needs to be representation as well. We all can't leave. You know what I mean? So it's like you do have to protect your space, protect your peace, yourself, but there is something to be said for representation in the classroom. So I'm sure when students see you, there has to be some kind of recognition and excitement for that. And thank you for that, because the Black female professors I've had in my life have been so far and few in between. But whenever I saw one had one, I was like, yes, finally. Yes, we represent. Yes. Because there really is something to be said about representation in higher education classrooms. So thank you so much for all that you do.
Oh, and thank you so much, Dr. Dorsía Smith Silva, for all that you do. Yes. So I'm going to just wrap us up. I'm going to take you off, wrap up the end, and then if you and I can just touch base a little bit before we go on to our afternoons. Oh my gosh, this was amazing.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. So thank you so much for joining me for episode 7 of season 6 of Black Writers Read. I'll be back on Sunday, October 26th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time with the wife writing team, Naomi Rivers. I'm so excited. I've been in conversation with them for over a year to have them on, and this is so perfect. Support Black Writers Read by subscribing to my YouTube channel, where many of you are joining us from today, or the audio podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Feel free to drop a review of the Black Writers Read podcast on your preferred platform. Your review not only helps the algorithms, it makes it easier for others to find us. If you are able and so moved, please support us on Patreon. We're on Patreon under Black Writers Read. Also, many of the books featured on the platform are available for purchase at our online bookshop, where proceeds benefit the author, independent booksellers, and Black Writers Read. Also, please, particularly with this book, support Split This Rock on bookshop.org. By supporting us in these various ways, you're helping to sustain not only my work, the platform, but also independently produced media. Visit blackwritersread.com to learn more about the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon, and more importantly, for ensuring that Black authors continue to matter. I'll see you next Sunday.